Welcome to Graphic Policy Radio Podcast, the podcast where comics and politics meet. I'm your host, Ilana Levin. This is the show for the sorts of fans who understand why it matters that Batman's super genius arch nemesis Bane is Latino, and have moved on to debate whether his place of origin is supposed to be fake Cuba or fake El Salvador, and have thoughts about why each of these options tells a different tale of colonialism. Speaking of Batman, joining me on today's show is a comics writer and critic, Cheryl Lynn Eaton, who's making her debut as a Batman writer in this month's issue of Batman Secret Files. A New York metropolitan native, now safely nestled in the outskirts of Atlanta, Cheryl Lynn Eaton has contributed to pop culture sites such as a columnist and reporter, held court as a founder of the Orms Society, maintained a position as an editor for an academic press, written for comic publishers such as Image and DC, and served as an editorial intern for Publishers Weekly. Real quick, I just want to remind folks that early voting has begun in many states, and if you are living in a state that has early voting, you should go and do that right now. I also know that all of our listeners who are citizens and able to vote are going to be doing that. But I'm also counting on you all to talk to all of your friends and relatives, because you don't assume that because you're prepared and thinking about these things, that they're prepared and thinking about these things. And make sure that folks aren't just voting for Congress, but they're voting for your local offices as well. And vote.org is a good resource to learn more information. And with that in mind, hello, Cheryl.
Hello, and I am proud to say that I have already voted. Thank goodness for early voting.
Woohoo. Yeah, that's right. You're in Georgia.
Yes, and I was very excited to go in and vote. Very, very excited to get my little peach sticker. So, yeah, I went in earlier last week, and popped in, and it just took a few minutes. I was so happy.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the testimonial. There you go, folks. There you have it. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time because you're really one of my favorite critics, and it's always trying to figure out what is the right moment to have another critic on the show to talk shop. And then when I found out you have a comic coming out right this fall, I said, this is the perfect excuse to make it happen.
Yes.
But it's always interesting to me to see fellow critics getting into the writing end of things.
It's odd. I'm happy that I'm getting into the more creative side. I always felt like I was a critic because there were things in the industry that really upset me. And for a long time, I hadn't seen it change. But now that I'm seeing those changes being made, I feel like I can sort of separate myself and hop on over to the other side. Although I obviously do not stop talking or analyzing these stories, as you can tell on Twitter or any kind of social media. I am still obsessed with breaking it down according to culture and politics and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. What was the first comic script that you wrote? Was it for
the first comic strip that I wrote that I was actually paid for was for Kelly Sue and Val DeLandro for Bitch Planet Triple Feature.
That's right.
But before that, I was basically doing many years ago as a young kid writing full-on Wildcat scripts for the early edition of Wildcat. So I've been writing for a long time. But my first professional work as a comic writer was for Image Comics for Bitch Planet Triple Feature, which I was so excited and happy to be a part of.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a great place. I mean, I liked that she was bringing in new voices and new talent to jump into the world she was building.
Yes, and I had actually, what was so funny is that when she approached me, I had already said, well, I guess comics is just not going to happen. It's just not going to be a thing for me. And she actually approached me, I believe it was at Rose City Comic Con, and said, just think about it. I think this would be good for you. And she was the one who kind of roped me back in because I was out of the game. I was like, I guess it's not going to happen. And she really kind of lit a fire under me and gave me the motivation to stick with it. And I have to thank her because, if not for her, I don't think I would be writing about comics, but I don't think I would be writing comics.
Right. And had it been a long time since you'd written fiction?
For comics, yeah, it had been a while, yeah.
It's always interesting trying to change gears. Like I think that when I started to do fiction for the first time as an adult ever, like I was really thankful that I'd been starting to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like I needed something to kick my head out of strictly critical mode and into fictional universe building, I suppose. I don't know. Did you have anything that you were doing to sort of bring yourself into storytelling rather than just story analysis mode?
I think because when I would analyze stories or I would analyze characters, I was so focused on relationships and on position in society that it was easy to work my way into fiction because I was already focused on relationships. I was already focused on how these characters would interact because of their positions, not only with each other, but within the society that, well, not our society, but within the society that they exist in.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, having read the story that you have in the new Batman Secret Files issue, that's very much comes to light in Batman's interactions with the two reoccurring characters from his cast in it.
Yeah, I'm so happy that I got to bring back Lucius, who is just a favorite of mine, and hopefully we get to chop it up about Bane a little bit later because I do love him too.
I do. Oh God, I know. One of my favorite villains. And just one of those characters that people just do amazing things with, or they really don't get it, and it feels like it's one or the other.
That is true, but I think he has. Well, I don't want to say he has so much potential because now that potential is being realized, so we're actually seeing it now. But for a long time, I feel like people did not really dig into the background of Bane or the, I guess, fictional culture. It's so funny because everyone chooses a different country that they believe the fictional country to be. And for me, it was the Dominican Republic. That's the one I chose.
Yes. Oh my God. That was actually, I had 3 options and then I switched to just be 2. And the third one I cut off was DR. So please continue.
It's so funny. Well, for me, it's just a little bit of a bias because that was, I came from a town that was like 70-80% Latino. And the 2 major cultures that were there were Puerto Rican and from the Dominican Republic. Yeah. So that's like the culture that I was the most familiar with. So that would, that is always, Caribbean Latino cultures are always the ones I gravitate towards the most because of where I was raised and also my like early formative friendships when I was a young girl. And also coming, like if you go back a couple of generations, my family we're not Latino, but we are from the Caribbean. So it's kind of like, neighboring.
Yeah. Well, I definitely feel like there's a real United Fruit Company undercurrent to some of the Santa Prisca, like, canon takes that I've seen in the comics.
What's weird for me with Bane and just looking at it from both the comic and also from the cartoon is that there's it's almost like he's piecemeal and they select different portions from different cultures. And I think it would be best. No, I don't want to say it would be best. I would like it the most if they would pick one and just run with that. But I think the reason why you have that piecemeal is because people select different things that they like from different cultures and sort of try to mix it into one for Bane. But it comes across a little weird for me because I'm just like, well, he has, the lucha mask, but then he also comes from this island that is very, reminiscent of DR. It's just, it's weird for me. And I kind of wish they would just pick one and just, run with it.
Well, that's definitely one of the things with DC in the sense that DC is this world that most of the places are fictional. Like it took a long time for DC to decide that New York also existed in addition to Gotham and Metropolis and stuff. So it's just one of those core world building differences that it's easy to forget, and then you remember it and you're like, oh, that it's huge. It's a huge difference between DC and Marvel.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how they make that work because, like, I was looking at a map recently, and so Gotham would be where Jersey City is now. And I'm just like, you can't have something as big as Gotham that's right next to something as big as New York City. It just does not work that way. So you can't just like knock Jersey City out and put Gotham there. Maybe if Gotham was a little bit smaller, I think it would work. But Gotham is, clearly just as big and just as, it's just as big as New York. So it's kind of strange to see. I kind of prefer the Grand Theft Auto version where they knock out the real American cities and just place them, their cities within that area.
And did you come up primarily as a DC fan, or?
No, it was funny because I was totally Image. I jumped in as a kid in the 90s with Wildstorm, and from Wildstorm I bounced on over to Marvel because I was like, oh, Storm looks interesting, and started to pick up the X books, but it wasn't until I didn't really get into DC until the cartoons. And then once Batman the Animated Series hit, then it was like, okay, this is DC for me. I love this. But it took a while. It was very roundabout. And it's funny because most people start with Marvel or DC, and I started with neither. Although technically, I guess I could say I did start with Marvel. My cousins used to collect Marvel, and I was over my grandmother's house as a very young kid, and that was when I was only reading Archies. And there was this issue where the X-Men went to hell. And I was like, oh, I'm done with comics. This is not, nope. That scared me so bad. It put me off like superheroes for the longest time. And I went right back to Archie. So technically my first was the X-Men. But I really jumped back in with Wildstorm.
Oh, that's interesting. Was it like, what was it about Wildstorm that grabbed you?
Jim Lee's art. And also the characters Voodoo and Grifter. I was just like, this is just, I love it. And I just love that right then it was like the mid 90s. So everything was just very, very flashy and very colorful. And they had the best production quality at the time compared to all other companies. And I think that's what just pulled me right in. Just won the art, but all companies had wonderful art at that time. But it was really Wildstorm's production quality that was like above and beyond everyone else.
I know I haven't read much. Well, I never read any Wildcats basically, but Brett, who runs graphic policy, was always there telling me how I should have read Wildcats because it had tons of like anti-corporate political themes. Not only that, it's so funny. I have to go back and reread those issues as, a big old grown-up now that's very interested in society because when Alan Moore did his run, he really kind of did a compare and contrast of the alien races in Wildcats to the different races and cultures we have here in the United States, which was something that was very interesting. And basically you had two major warring factions. You had the Damonites and the Cherubim. And obviously at one point the Damonites were the ones who were evil. They were the monsters. And Alan Moore basically flipped it to the Cherubim were an invading, race, and they had enslaved the Damonites. And these characters that we believed were monsters the entire time were actually just fighting against slavery, which is, it was kind of blew my mind as a kid, reading that and just like, oh, what I had believed I was completely wrong about. So there was a lot of social issues that took place, obviously for younger kids or for teenagers, so it's a more simplistic view, but the seeds were there within Wildcats the same way they were there within X-Men as well. Yeah. And it's interesting, like talking about the question of like what politics do people pick up on when they're reading something, because having read your story, in the new issue of Batman Secret Files, I'm like, oh, okay, this is really political and topical and like happening right now. I don't know to what extent we can or should talk about the specifics of the story, but I think I could certainly ask, more broadly, like your story is very political in terms of the questions that it poses about technology and society and crime as a concept. When you're creating political work that you want to have interpreted with a particular angle, like how does it feel sort of putting it out there and then sort of having to wait and see what the audience takes from it and wait to hear their interpretations and like if they get it right or if they don't get it right or if they maybe take a message from it that isn't what you're looking for?
Oh my goodness, you have me terrified now. The funny thing was when I wrote the story, I did not think about that. I didn't think about being political. What I thought about was how much I felt like I was one of the people from the Hill and how the Hill is not represented anymore and has not been represented for a very long time within the DC universe and within the books. I think the last time was Batman the Hill with Priest and Sean Martinborough was I think that was the last time anyone had really focused on those characters and what they are doing when Joker is, blowing up banks and amusement parks. So my first focus was I want to tell a story about the people that remind me of the people from home. And that was more the focus than talking about politics. It was representing a group that I felt was missing or hadn't been talked about for a while in the Batman or in the DC universe.
That's really great though, because the idea of that Batman would have the same relationship with people from every slice of life is ridiculous. So having a take on him that's really rooted in a particular community, especially one that's like feeling like Batman is really left to them and hasn't really done shit for them is really important.
And not only Batman, but also Gordon and the Gotham Police Department. They are so focused on metahumans and so focused on the inmates of Arkham that a lot of people fall through the cracks in that universe. And that's something that I wanted to discuss, which is something that you don't see in our universe because you see almost like an obsessive amount of over-policing. So it's really a contrast to what goes on for us to what goes on in Gotham.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question though, right? So like if we're talking about the problem of over-policing in terms of the fact that, for example, the overwhelming, even in New York today with Mayor de Blasio, the overwhelming majority of people who are arrested for just basic minor drug possession are still people of color, even though most of the people who have drugs are white people. Like we're talking about that problem of over policing, but then in comics you look at a lot of places because the heroes are generally speaking put into the same category as vigilantes, as people who are supposed to be intervening in stopping some sort of concept of crime. It's like it's just challenging for us, as people who don't want to romanticize the policing as a activity that is somehow always going to help people.
It's true, and it's something that I struggle with. Not to jump from to DC to other universes, but the fact that for Luke Cage, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix TV series, but the fact that he was made a cop is something that really deeply bothered me. And I was surprised to what extent it bothered me, but I did not like the fact that he was originally a cop. I think it was very important that they leave Luke as someone who is a man of the street, a man who does not trust cops because they did not treat him fairly. And when you make him a cop, I think you definitely lose that. And not only, and it's important to have that because I think it's important for children who are from the same area as Luke to be able to see that they can be heroes as well. And see that there is someone who really represents them, and a lot of them may feel that the police department does not.
Yeah. I mean, I've not seen season 2. I very much enjoyed season 1, but definitely one of the consistent critiques that, you know, I was hearing from a lot of my friends who are critics in Black activist spaces was like, this is like the most establishmentarian Luke Cage
Yes.
we could have possibly come out with.
It was really strange to see that a Luke who is so conservative and I guess older than his years, because Coulter is what, 39, 40, and Luke really carries himself as someone who is in his late 40s, maybe very early 50s. So he comes across like he comes from an older generation than what Luke really should be.
Yeah. So in the second season, like, did you bother keeping up on it, or?
I am like 75% of the way through the second season, and I enjoy the show, but it's just something that nags at me, and I seem to find myself rooting for the villains or drawn to the villains more than the hero, which is weird. I mean, I adored Cottonmouth, and I understood kind of where he was coming from. He was Harlem, way more than Luke Cage was Harlem. And although I don't agree with, you know, his methods, and I definitely don't agree with the violence, and I definitely don't agree with the dealing of drugs and of guns, but he was definitely more Harlem and more of the street than Luke Cage, who is a former cop from Savannah, you know, would be.
Well, it's complicated because, like, for me, my favorite character is Mariah Dillard. And in real life, like, my literal job that I have been paid to do in multiple races is, like, get rid of corrupt Democratic elected officials during the Democratic primary. So, like, in real life, it's like I would be working for whatever reform candidate was fighting against her. Like, that would be my actual job that people would pay me to do. So on the show, I was like, oh, they did such a good job with her. That seems about right. Like, you know, they just did such a great job with the character. And so I loved it, even though, like, she's like my nemesis, but I totally get it because she's a real person. She's not, you know, like with real humanity. It's not like some unfathomable, like, where is this coming from? Like, you see completely where this is coming from and the desperation that creates the political machines that exist. And
definitely, you know, there are Mariah Dillards out there. So this is it's not something that, like, they have demonized, some poor unfortunate soul. No, there are people, obviously not to the extent, I hope, because I don't know for sure, hopefully not to the extent of a Mariah Dillard, but the seeds are there, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's interesting. I haven't determined if I'm going to go in and put in the time to watch season 2 yet. So I'm always interested in hearing what other critics I like have to say about it. What about, have you watched the new Daredevil season much?
No, I just started. Yeah. I love Daredevil, so obviously I'm going to. So I've just seen episode 1, and then I am going to launch into it. I've seen all of them. I have not seen Jessica Jones season 2 yet.
Don't bother. Just don't bother.
Oh, wow. I had issues with season 1, but it was enjoyable. But then I heard mixed reviews about season 2. There were some people who were very upset with season 2. So
I wish I could have the time back. That I basically watched all of season 2 so that I could be prepared to cover it on the podcast. And then by the time I was done with it, I was so completely embroiled in my, like, political work and stuff. It was like, why am I going to spend time talking about why Jessica Jones season 2 is massively disappointing and doesn't address any of the racial problems that were like that were problems in season 1 that like, well, maybe they'll fix it in season 2. They didn't. So in season 2, you don't even have the fact that it's a good show to, like, put back against the, you know, season 1, it's like, it has racism problems. It's a good show. I don't know. That's complicated. Season 2, it's like, it's not even a good show and it hasn't fixed its racism problem. So I just,
wow, I will definitely be skipping it. But the funny thing about season 1 is these problems exist, but then Also, Jessica would probably, like, the way she operated, it made sense. It made sense for someone who is coming from who has her specific privileges. The way she behaved towards men of color and towards women of color, it made sense. So even though I was disturbed by it, and there were things that annoyed me, I was just like, I could see how this character would make these decisions, towards Malcolm, towards Luke. It made sense according to the character. And obviously, these characters aren't perfect. They're going to have biases. They're going to, do the wrong thing. Even heroes do the wrong thing at certain times. So it was something that I had pointed out with a column that I wrote, but it wasn't something where I was going to write off the show because of it. But now everyone talking about how bad season 2 is, now I'm just like, well, I guess I will write off the show.
I mean, there's a really interesting, there's an Asian American character who is like really cool for like about an episode, and then they just treat him in a way that, and there's a difference between the show treating somebody in a way that's dehumanizing and Jessica treating somebody in a way that's dehumanizing. Like, Jessica's a bad person, so, she'll treat some people in a way that's dehumanizing. But I felt like the way the show treated him was dehumanizing, too. So I was like, done with you. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about, Daredevil after you're done with that. I will probably get deeper into it after the election. I've watched the first 2 episodes, but, I imagine we'll probably weigh in on that at some point in time.
Yeah, that is my favorite, so I'm definitely going to just launch into that as soon as I have time.
Well, I'll take it from you. Like, I was very critical of Daredevil season 2. What is it that has you really excited to watch Daredevil season 3?
The funny thing is that I am like the complete opposite. I loved half of Daredevil season 2. It's funny because when you are a person of color who is involved with comics and you have an interest in race and ethnicity and sociology, people just assume that you are only focused on your particular ethnicity, or race. So like, I'm only focused on blackness. But the interesting thing about season 2 of Daredevil is really the compare and contrast between Daredevil and his Irish Catholic background and Punisher and what I definitely believe is an Italian American Catholic background, and just how they interact and clash and move with each other. And that's the one thing that the Marvel Netflix shows got perfectly right. I think they did drop the ball a little bit when it came to exploring, New York blackness, as opposed to Luke, who's very much concentrated in his southernness and almost kind of a conservative kind of Bible-based slant. But when it comes to, white Catholic European, oh my God, Daredevil season 2 just nailed it. And it was, as someone who's like a former, born in New York, went to school, in Brooklyn, it was something that was really interesting to see. And I wish they had explored that with Asian American characters and with Latino characters and with African American characters, but they kind of dropped the ball a little bit. But it's not too late. I mean, listen, they could go back in and do that. Luke Cage has unfortunately been canceled, but hey, Heroes for Hire, or I would be very, very, very happy with a White Tiger series or a Shang-Chi series, let me tell you.
Oh, yeah, Daughters of the Dragon better be happening. I just keep expecting that to be the next piece of news we hear. We've finally been freed of the curse of White Iron Fist's existence.
I would love for that to happen, but I am not expecting it simply because of Disney's new streaming service that's going to... I think we might be robbed of that, which makes me very sad.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, one of the things I really appreciate with you as a critic is that you're somebody who isn't just talking about the material and analyzing it, but you're also looking at it in context of the industry. I feel like a lot of critics only wear one of those two hats, and wearing them both together really offers a lot more richness. So I know that one of the things that I've always appreciated with your comics criticism and analysis has been looking at like the systems that the industry has set up that undermined its own success with great regularity. And so it's interesting to see, you're talking also about that the platform issue where Marvel Netflix is kind of, because Marvel's starting its own streaming, Marvel Netflix has less of a reason to want to keep creating good content for a platform it doesn't own.
Right, and the impact that it has on society and on us, because it makes me a little sad, because even though I adored Black Panther, when you really think about it, you are kind of losing the African American voice. You still have Black voices, you still have Black representation, but that representation is from a mythical country for the most part. So losing Luke Cage, losing Misty Knight, it would be great if they brought that to the streaming service, but if they don't, then that's a certain, those are cultures and voices that are then kind of lost when it comes to representation. And even beyond Black people, you have that, those concentrated New York, European, Asian American, there are cultures that are kind of not represented in the larger MCU that are represented in the Netflix universe that I would be really sad to see lost.
That is very true. And I appreciate the attempts at sense of place that the series, some of them do better job of it than others, but of at least going for that. Yeah. Well, with your work for DC, is Secret, is this story that you're doing, is this part of an ongoing series of Batman comics, or how does this playing together?
Well, Secret Files is something that used to be not a series, but just a regular occurring book that happened in the past. And I think what DC is doing now with Secret Files is really interesting in that it's using it to break new voices, or just basically that. It's using it to break new voices. So what is wonderful about the Secret Files book is that it provides a platform, and it uses established creators as an anchor. So you have, Tom King working in the book, and that's your anchor, that's your star. And then you have, younger writers, newer writers that also provide shorter stories that are basically, you have the stars sharing that platform, and they're sharing that platform through, anthologies, which, I love anthologies, and I love the fact that DC is going back to the well for them. And I would love for Marvel to do more as well, because I think that is just the best way to bring new voices, different voices into the industry.
Yeah, I love it. And for that exact reason, if you're able to have more people mentoring new writers as well, Scott Snyder certainly seems like someone who's done that for a number of queer comics writers, for example, himself. And now to see a book with the purpose of getting folks who are, buying it for a particular writer's name to come in, or they're buying it because they love Batman, and then giving them the opportunity to hear new voices talk about a character they already care of in this sort of one-off format. It sounds like just a great way to diversify the industry.
And it's funny because I believe that, like I said before, when I finally got back finally started writing creatively instead of just writing about the comics, but now I'm writing the comics. And the reason why I felt more comfortable making that change is because I felt like things were changing in the industry, and it was easier for newer voices and for diverse voices to have a platform. And I think the reason why you have that, just to be brutally honest, is because the superstars you have now have a more diverse selection of peers and friends, and mentor a more diverse selection of people. And that is the reason why you have these new voices, is because the superstars now, which is still, not as diverse. When you look at the superstar list, it's still, a bunch of, white men I love, white men who I'm friends with, but, straight white men nonetheless. But the difference between this generation that we have now of superstars and the generation before it, is that this generation is friends with, mentors, and collaborates with a wider selection of people. And that's why the industry is changing. For at least I believe that's why the industry is changing.
I believe that that's a big piece of it too. I really do. Especially good to hear you say that. I also think that part of the reason why they have those relationships is because of social media, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I definitely believe so. With social media, it's kind of, a double-edged sword because they tell you, watch what you say on social media, be very careful. But then this is how we are getting these collaborations. This is how we're getting these interactions. This is how we are broadening our horizons by talking to people who are different from us, Mm-hmm. Although I do want to stress that when it's important to talk to people who are different from you, but it's important not to talk to people who are abusive. So yes. It's funny because people are just like, you should talk to people different from you. And I'm just like, that's a great idea. But I'm not going to talk to someone who is a bully or who harasses me or who is going to be bigoted. That is just not healthy to have in your life. Yep. or when you socialize with another person.
Yeah, I always say I'm not going to talk to somebody who thinks that I'm less than human. Like, that's not going to work out for me. And that's just going to hurt us. So yeah. I'm going to ask you to join me in not talking with the person who thinks that we're less than human. But yeah, like, I really think that these relationships, like, you and I know each other because of Twitter. I mean, so many of the people who I know on comics are folks who I encountered on Twitter and not just from, and I go to New York Comic Con every year. Right. I live in New York. I can do that. But like, these were relationships that we wouldn't have held or created without comics Twitter being the space that it is. So, on the one hand, it's like, I really want the publishers to have a code of conduct for people who are working on their characters to not engage in abusive behavior online. But I don't want them to be going around telling creators not to engage on social media, because that is one of the roots that we've had for introducing diverse voices into the industry.
Right. And so it's sad to see some creators closing themselves off. I understand it, but it is sad to see. And I'll be honest, I use block lists. Just because I don't want to expose myself to racism or other types of bigotry online. But I no longer have a lock on my account, simply because you have to get rid of that padlock in order to get work and interact with people.
Yep. Yeah. Do you know if you're going to be making any future appearances in the Batman title or other DC books in the coming soon?
I don't know, but fingers crossed. I would love to. Revisit.
Everybody go buy it. Yeah, I love the pitch you put together for Batman Decades.
I want that so bad. It's so funny because I get on Twitter and then I pitch for other people. Like, I don't want to write. Like, this Batman Decade should be DC Decade should be a superstar project. It should be like just top of the line.
Tell people about what this is.
Okay.
Idea.
Okay, hold on. First of all, I think it's, oh my goodness, what is his, I'm going to have to look it up while I'm talking on the phone with you.
Francisco Francavilla?
Yes. Okay. His Batman 1974 image that he released and put online, which is just, oh my goodness, it's just amazing. And what I thought was the best thing about the DC, well, I don't want to say it's the best thing, but one thing I really like about the DC universe is that Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, these are icons, and you can kind of mold them and fit them into any type of story you would like to tell from any time period. And I know if you look at the Elseworlds, DC has been doing that in the past. But what I think would be great, because these characters are so beloved and because we are so obsessed as a country with nostalgia, it would be wonderful to assign each member of the Trinity to a decade and tell a story that is just basically the story of that decade. So obviously for Batman, you would have Batman rooted in the 70s, rooted in a Gotham that looks very much like 1974 New York, which, according to my mother, was a terrible place, but a very good place to have a crime story. It was the best place to have a crime story is in New York in the early 70s. Or to have Superman in the 1950s, or to have Wonder Woman, 1940s, World War II, to just tell that story of that decade using one of DC's icons. And you could just span that from the 1930s right on up to the 90s, or even, the 2000s if you'd like to. And I would love to see a different team take on a different decade, like Phil Noto for the 60s. Oh my goodness, a Justice League story set in the 60s with Gorgeous. Phil Noto would just be amazing.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I think it's a lot of fun. Well, oh golly, I had the best follow-up and it just completely fell out of my ear.
Oh.
Well, I'm sure it'll come back to me and then I'll smack myself in the head about it. But before I forget, Mary Worth. Talk to people about what you've been doing with Mary Worth and what is this Mary Worth thing.
I love Mary Worth, and people think that it's like I'm just making fun of the comic strip. I am not making fun of this comic strip. I absolutely love this comic strip. And the funny thing is that I came across it because I forget who I was talking to on Twitter, but we were wondering if the newspaper strips, because they're so conservative, if they acknowledge major, events in our history. And I wondered if they had mentioned 9/11 in like the comic. And so I was just like, I wonder, and I was looking up like all of the different strips to see all of the different like romance and drama strips to see if they had referenced it. And they did not, but I got hooked on Mary Worth because there was a breakup happening within the story during the time within the comic. And I just got hooked. And every poor unfortunate soul who followed me on Twitter basically was just held prisoner while I ran through decades of Mary Worth and basically told the story of Mary Worth to everyone who followed me online. I love that comic. I do. And it's not ironic. I just genuinely love it. It's just the most bizarre little perfect soap opera.
I just really enjoy reading you write about Mary Worth, even though I haven't read Mary Worth since I stopped reading a paper on printed paper.
I actually met the artist for Mary Worth at Baltimore Comic Con. I was elated. She's just
cool.
A lovely, lovely person. And I actually found out some information on the writer. It's funny because I always thought that Mary Worth was like a little tongue-in-cheek, but actually the writer of the comic, Karen Moy, I believe, is just as good and just as just innocent as Mary Worth is, which is just kind of heartwarming to hear. That it's just completely genuine. The comic is completely genuine all the way through.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. I enjoy critical work. So when people have interesting things to say about topics that I haven't put much mental capacity into, I can just be super on board just to learn and hear it from their perspective,
Yeah. It's funny because people are so shocked that I joke that I love this comic and it is the whitest comic strip on earth. It's funny because people always assume that you're just going to like what represents you. And that's definitely not the case. I have a wide variety of things I like. And it's funny that I never had an issue with the lack of representation in Mary Worth, mainly because it's a very close-knit community being written about, and it's basically a very wealthy area of Southern California. So it's not like I'm expecting to have a ton of Black people in the comic strip, but I think there's been like 3 in like 4 decades.
I can't fathom how that is. Yeah, that's not. That's statistically impossible. I mean,
It's crazy. It's like it's so funny, and then like I'll be like POC alert when I actually like see one. I'll make the announcement that, oh my goodness. Although it's funny because it has changed dramatically with the new creative team that took over in 2016. So that is it's really changed quite a bit. It's way more diverse than it has been in the decades prior.
Do you think that fans of Cape books should revisit Mary Worth, and do you think we'd be into it if we like superhero soap operas like the X-Men?
If you like soaps, you will. I think Mary Worth is probably a bit too innocent for those who are who love the drama of X-Men or the DC universe. It's a very innocent comic, but it's very charming and very heartwarming. But if you like the old school soaps, I think Mary Worth is something that you would like. You'll miss
Gotcha.
there's no scandal in Mary Worth. So it's missing the
What?
scandal,
Okay.
but the soap is definitely there.
I remembered the question I was going to ask you,
Okay.
which was DC's Black Label Comics. I had meant to cover it on the show. We haven't had a chance to it yet. It seems like you have some thoughts about it as a concept, and I'd love to hear them.
It's let's hope this does not get me in trouble. But I really love the idea of Black Label, and I think it's something that we should have. We should have the ability to explore adult. I don't mean adult as in pornographic, but we should have the ability to explore adult themes with these characters in a way that's separate from the main universe that kids and teenagers enjoy.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having something that's completely carved off away from the main universe. Just, very your coffee table book that adults can discuss. And I feel bad that Black Label got such a bad rap because of what occurred in Batman Damned, I believe is the comic. And it became so focused on the nudity instead of the story. But that's something that I think the creative team can't. You don't have control over how the media or how the audience is going to respond to your story. So you just got to run with it. And unfortunately, it became all about naked Batman and instead of the story itself. And that became the hook for Black Label. It became, this is going to be these salacious, you're going to be able to see Batman nude instead of, it's about adult themes. Now it's about sexual themes. And there's a definite difference between adult and sexual that I think got lost in all of the controversy with
Ding,
Batman
ding, ding.
Damned.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm like, yes, this is very much so. I really was frustrated at how fans and fan media were responding to it. I thought it was really infantile. I felt like the coverage was so bad that I went and I read the issue when I hadn't even planned to, just because I felt like I needed to be able to offer an opinion on this matter. But I was like, okay, we have casual nudity here that is used as a symbolism of Batman's physical vulnerability and this moment, like his emotional vulnerability. So like it makes sense that he's naked. They're doing something with it. Right. There's women in sexualized naked situations constantly in comics for like no reason at all. This wasn't even sexualized, and I was like, this makes sense to me. And I think that fans deserve as much. I don't know what the male equivalent of TNA is, but like, I don't know, DNC, as female bodies have TNA, but this wasn't even that. And so the assumption that all nudity is prurient was just really missing the point. My point was like, we deserve prurient and non-prurient, and this wasn't even prurient, and trading it like it was prurient is really infantile because that's just not what it was.
Yeah, that's basically it exactly. And what makes me so sad is I think that brought the hammer down on Black Label. I don't know, I don't know how it's going to be going forward, but it seemed like DC kind of pulled back once they saw the response. So we may not be getting the investment in the label that we would have gotten before if it had not been such a joking kind of response from the media and from audiences.
I just think people are really uncomfortable with male nudity because they never have to think about it. And like female nudity is just taken as the basic assumption for art.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's frustrating, and I'm not certain how you go about combating that. I guess with male nudity, just keep going at it until people get used to it, the same way they're used to seeing naked women in comics constantly. I mean, it's just like to the point where it's just like, oh my goodness, again. Maybe that's what it takes for people to finally respond in the same way.
And, you know, Bitch Planet was such a great job of having sexualized female nudity and unsexualized female nudity and being like, look, you can have both of these things, and having people be super sexed up in contexts where it's rapey is not cool, but you can have people in sexualized nudity when they're having sex in ways that are, you know, plot that you have a different emotional response to. Like, you know, we have comics that have illustrated that distinction before, so
yeah, it's amazing. Val did an amazing job with what is a really difficult situation, especially probably coming from someone who just has the male gaze as a default, being a man. The fact that he was able to make that division and make that distinction is just, he's just did an amazing job in Bitch Planet. He really has.
Yeah. It's a great comic. And I know that you have one more thing coming out soon. You've been recently announced as a writer for
Humanoids. Yes, I'm going to be the writer for the book Omni from Humanoids. Unfortunately, there's a gag order in place, so I cannot discuss that more, but I am very, very happy to be with this company. It's just a wonderful company, and I'm so happy to start my my first ongoing series.
Yeah, that is really exciting. Looking for the ongoing. Can people put in an order for that at their stores yet, or is that not time?
It's not time. It's still a little early, but I will definitely love to come back and talk about it once I can.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. That was one of the panels I was at New York Comic Con where I learned a lot of stuff that I did not know previously. So, hey. Well, we're coming up on an hour and just a little bit. I wanted to see from you, you know, if for our listeners, where's the best place for us to keep abreast of your critical work online?
The best place would be my website, which is just my name, CherylLynnEaton.com. And they just have, there's links to everything else there. And you could subscribe to the newsletter where you get information on what's coming out next. And there's even a list of my work, and you can get some freebies as well, some free snippets of prose and poems and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll be getting on your email list for sure. And then you're also on Twitter and active there as well, which as your account is
everything. It's so simple. Everything is my name. So on Twitter, my name, Instagram, my name, Tumblr. Yes, I'm even on Tumblr. I'm one of the last people that is still on. I love Tumblr. I don't care. But that's my name. It's funny because so many people say that, like, oh, and well, people say it about Twitter too, but it's just like, oh, Tumblr is so depressing and it's a whole bunch of infighting and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, it's really how well you curate your social media. So I see pictures of puppies and nice, you know, inspirational messages when I log into Tumblr. I don't see any fighting at all. So it really depends on who you follow.
I mean, for me, like, Tumblr is the site where I'm not as active there as I used to be, partially because I'm on Twitter for my job constantly, right. Ilana_Brooklyn. But with Tumblr was the place where I would see the most people who were women or non-binary or agender, like people who were not cis men, basically, talking about comics and geek culture. Like, Tumblr is just this amazing big space where we get to geek out, and there's like no cis men. That's magical. I like that.
You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the negative reaction to Tumblr is just Tumblr being the digital version of a pumpkin spice latte, where the world sees that women, you know, people who are not straight white men are into it, and it becomes a bad thing, even though it's not a bad thing. I love pumpkin spice lattes and I love Tumblr.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely Tumblr holes you can fall down where there's teenagers and you want to pull your hair out, but like, let the teenagers be teenagers. We don't have to get into their purity debates. Like, that, let them have their space.
Right.
We could hang out with other adults and have interesting conversations about geek stuff and not have to deal with like straight men who are cisgender for a little while. It's cool. So that's
Although
my
I
pitch
love
for
them
Tumblr.
too, but it's good for everyone to have a platform,
space.
and for everyone to have a space and a voice.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't have to always have. We could be like more dominant voices in certain spaces for a change, and
Right.
yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm really excited to read the rest of the issue. I really enjoyed the comic. The artist who did the work, who you partnered with on it, were really good.
Oh, let me give shout outs to everyone. Pencils, Elena Casagrande. Colors, Jordi Belair.
Oh, yeah.
Editing, Jamie Ritz and Brittany Holzer. I had the most amazing. I can't believe how lucky I am every single time. I was unbelievably lucky with Bitch Planet Triple Feature, and this time I was unbelievably lucky as well. And I'm just so scared of like the one time where I'm not going to have a good team. But so far, I am just batting 1,000. I am just getting the most amazing people to create stories with, and I'm just so lucky.
Oh, actually, I should ask, what was the creative process like for developing the look for the young black woman who you created for the story?
It was just basically the only thing that I was just like, I would love to have this hairdo, but if you think that something else would be, better, then go for it. But luckily, Elena was like, I'm gonna go for it, and I'm gonna go for the one that you chose. But basically, it was just giving Elena the space to just run with it. The only thing that I did sneak in, and I can talk about this even though it's a little bit of a secret, is in my old neighborhood there used to be a store called 99-Cent Dreams, and I was like, you guys have to put this store in the comic. And so they actually listened to me and amazingly put the store in the comic. So that was just like a beautiful thing, to get that kind of like feel of like home in the work.
Cool. I definitely am always like, when you're doing a quick turn on a story, it's always interesting to hear like how writers and artists are working together to develop character looks who like don't exist previously, and black women with black hair and stuff like that is important.
Oh, Elena was an absolute dream to work with, and it's funny because I thought we would have like issues because of like the language gap, but obviously she's not an American. She knows multiple languages, so she was like, I'm good, don't worry about it. So
Awesome.
We didn't have that trouble at all, so it was
it looks great.
Yeah, and what's easy is that Gotham already sort of has a look that you know what Gotham looks like, and it's very much reminiscent of New York. So she already had like a game plan, and I already had a game plan to work with, which is really great. That's the good thing about working within the DC universe, is that it's a world that's already built. You just have to provide your own unique angle to it.
And you definitely have done that with the story. I'm
Thank
really
you.
excited about it. I was very pleased, and I'm excited to read what you do next.
All right,
So-
thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. And for our listeners, Graphic Policy Radio is brought to you by graphicpolicy.com, your site for comics and geek news and reviews. We are going to have the finale episode of Venture Brothers podcast. Hopefully to have it be up next week. Things are a little bit crazy on account of the fact that there's an election. You may have heard about it, and it's incredibly important. So I'm not exactly sure when that final Venture Brothers podcast episode will be. Possibly next week, but if it's not, you know why. It's because I have to go and talk to every voter in the district and make sure that they turn out. And what else we have coming up in the fall? We're going to have some other great comics writers guests as well. And urging you guys to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. Give us a review. That really does matter. And you can find me online at ELANA_Brooklyn on Twitter or at graphicpolicy.com. Thanks again. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.